Welcome to this tutorial on visualizing data using SPSS. Essentially what that means is we are going to take some data and make some graphs using SPSS so that we can see what the data looks like. So we are going to start by thinking about all the different steps that is going to take. So first of all, we're going to be doing this all the way from the beginning, from scratch. So not only are we going to talk about writing the questions for the data that we're going to collect, but then also how do we go about collecting it, how do we enter that data into SPSS, and then create and interpret the graphs that go with it. So let's start off by looking at the concept of writing questions. So part of the early part of any research project is to decide what kind of questions you want to ask. And we're going to ask 3 questions today. And I picked these specifically so that we would have the 3 different levels of measurement: scale, ordinal, and nominal. And so we're going to ask, what is your current age? And then there's a little blank for people to fill in with a number of years. Question number 2, in general, how happy are you? And that can be very happy, pretty happy, and not too happy. You can see that's kind of along a continuum from high to low. And then the third question, where were you born? Western US, Central US, Eastern US, and other. Now, aside from other, we could almost think of that as being a continuum along sort of the latitude of the United States, or longitude, but that, because we have other, then that could be really anywhere. So this ends up being a nominal variable, the where were you born. Now, we've worded the questions this way, but often, depending on the kind of discipline you're studying or the sort of research, there are others who have asked similar questions in the past, and it's actually very helpful to word your questions the same as they have in their studies so that you can compare. And probably the most common thing that people do is to find a standard questionnaire that already includes the questions that you need. And so some validated instrument that would already capture the exact same questions that somebody else did, and now you're repeating that kind of study in a different way. So there are a variety of ways to come up with questions, but these are just some of them. But the primary thing that I like people to think about when they're writing questions, especially if you're writing them from scratch, is how could that specific question be a sensitive question for somebody who's going to be answering this particular survey. So let's look at these one at a time. First of all, we have, what is your current age? A lot of times we might be just tempted to say, how old are you? And the notion of being old, for some people, when they are thinking about old, they don't want to be a certain amount old. And so if you just ask their current age, that might be a little bit less sensitive, although for somebody who doesn't want to tell you what their age is, that may not change that particular factor of it. So there, for sometimes, like with age, there may just not be a completely diplomatic way of asking that, but if we ask, what is your current age, rather than how old are you, that might seem better to some people. This next question, in general, how happy are you? If a person is very happy, then they might be just fine answering that particular question. But if they're not very happy, they might think that they're supposed to be happy, and they want to give you the answer that they think that you're after, and so they may not be inclined to answer a question that they feel like they're giving some information that's negative. And so those are some of the kinds of things that people might be thinking of. The where were you born question, that could be sensitive to people for all kinds of different reasons. If they thought that the researchers felt that there was a certain place that was better than others, if somehow they had gotten that impression earlier in the survey, or just by talking to them, or based on what their research question is, they may be less inclined to want to answer that. Or if somebody feels embarrassed that they were born in a certain place, like maybe not born in the United States would be other. And so if a person doesn't feel like answering it, they might just leave it blank, and then we're stuck without the information. So we want to ask the questions in the very best way possible. And the final thing that we can do on our questionnaire is we can tell people that their answers are anonymous. We're not collecting their name. We may have a research number just so that we know we got all of the questionnaires back, but in some way we can assure them that their answers are protected so that they can give us their honest answers. And so that's one of the key features of a lot of questionnaires. So that is the super short version of writing questions. If you want to learn more about writing research questions, there are entire classes on that. And so we're just touching the tip of the iceberg here on some of these topics. The next thing after we write the questions is that we actually need to collect the data. And so we're going to just imagine a scenario where we have 12 imaginary people that we have collected this from, and I've just given them case numbers rather than names, so 1 through 12 here, and we asked them those questions and they answered or did not answer them, and here are their ages, here are their happy answers, very happy, pretty happy, not too happy, and then where they were born. And one of the things that I want to point out is that in this particular cell down here, for person number 11, under where were you born, it says missing. Now in SPSS, the missing really just is a dot once we put it into the data set, unless we code missing as something specific. So here are all of their answers, and we can just imagine that each row here is a person. And so here's person number 1, their age is 35, they are very happy, and they were born on the East Coast somewhere. So, another thing that I probably should mention is in this questionnaire, we would probably need to define exactly which states qualify as each one of those. And so here we've just given a really shortened version, but we would want to be really clear so that when people answer that, they know exactly what does Central mean, what does Eastern mean, what does Western mean. So then if they're not any of those, then they would be other. So here's the data that we have, and the next thing that we need to do is take that data and enter it into SPSS. So the data entry has 2 parts, and once you open SPSS, you'll be reminded of that because we need to tell SPSS what the variables are, and we need to tell SPSS what our data is for each of those variables. So it's going to take a minute here for my SPSS to open. And you'll see that when it first opens, it asks you, what file do you want to open?